in the sky. It's a bird.
It's a plane.
It's the Never Ending Battle, the Superman ranking podcast that reviews the adventures of Man of Steel and his extended family each week and ranks them from best to worst. I'm your host, Jordan, and welcome to the 4th episode of the Never Ending Battle. It's the new year, and that means it's New Year's Evil. Though this episode is actually going up after New Year's Eve, so the pun doesn't really work, but it doesn't matter. It's New Year's Evil. What we're going to be doing is taking a look at some of Superman's rogues gallery. Now, Superman has a fairly deep rogues gallery. I would argue that Superman has some of the most important, culturally important supervillains and some of the largest, deepest rogues gallery that you're going to find in most comic books. Because remember, Superman is the very first superhero, and as such, he tends to have the very first supervillains. What makes Superman really interesting is, in his early year, first couple years, he really doesn't have a lot of traditional supervillains. Most of the early Superman stories, most of the things that Superman are fighting are your traditional, what we would consider, injustices and overzealous officials. You get warmongers, wife beaters, organized crime in general. You get just bad, shady business dealmen, prison industrial complex, and also a weird story about him playing football with a bunch of assassins out to get a guy. That one's really weird. But for the most part, Superman's first year or so, he's not really fighting supervillains. Even early on, Batman was fighting the Joker. Not so much with Superman. And that makes sense because this stuff was kind of new. There was no really any supervillains. There wasn't superheroes, so supervillains was not really a concept. And Superman was originally developed as a news strip comic. So you would find him fighting, sort of injustices of society. This is a pre-World War II. This is a Great Depression era comic. That said, he does have the very first supervillain, Superman's original supervillain, and one of the very first supervillains ever, the Ultra Humanite. Now you may go, Jordan, that's the Ultra Humanite is not a Superman villain. The Ultra Humanite is a Justice Society of America villain. He dealt with more of the All-Star Squadron. That's something Infinity Inc. had to deal with. Maybe he would show up in a Crisis, crossover, but he was not really the threat. And I would argue he was and definitely is a very first Superman villain. It wasn't too much later that people but Roy Thomas, Jeff Johns, and many others would take the Ultra Humanite and apply them into a more modern sense. And he's associating with these very Golden Age and design with the more Golden Age heroes with the Justice Society. Round 1. It is Superman vs. the Cab Protective League. Action Comics number 13, written by Jerry Siegel, art by Joe Shuster, and published in June of 1939. This is obviously the oldest story we've covered in the podcast, and it is our first Golden Age story, true definitive Golden Age story. And boy howdy does it show it. It is a lean, mean 13 pages. It is a part of a larger anthology book. Action Comics at that time is exclusively an anthology series of various other heroes. If you go to read this on the DC If app, you will not find the other stories. Most of the stories are just the Superman ones. Action Comics number 13 opens with Clark Kent's cab ride being attacked by the Cab Protective League, a front for a protection racket. Superman decides to investigate and put down this Cab Protective League. He decides to start leaping around the city at night. And remember, this is during the Golden Age. Superman doesn't fly, the early Golden Age especially. Superman's not flying yet, so he's leaping around at night, leaping around the city, and he mostly does it at night. That's kind of a thing in this early era. He's mostly doing nighttime attacks. Most kind of like, Batman. He's a vigilante after all. So Superman's leaping around the city at night, and eventually he reaches to the rooftop of the Carlisle Cab Company. Now, the Carlisle Cab Company is identified as an independent cab company, not associated with the Cab Protective League, and the Cab Protective League is not taking that kindly. As Superman stands on top of the roof, he overhears the attempted extortion below as the Cab Protective League tries to coerce the Carlisle Cab Company into its racket. Superman does not take this lightly, and he busts through the skylight, all Batman-like, to break up the action. Man of Steel quickly dispenses with the racketeers and attempts to take one of them somewhere. So if you're reading the story, he captures one of the racketeers and he jumps off, and it's not really clear where he's going. I'm assuming he's taking him to the police. So what ends up happening is the hired muscle decides, as he's coming to in Superman's arms, decides that he's not going to go peacefully, so he tries to stab Superman. In the process, Superman doesn't get really affected by the stabbing, but it throws him off balance. So Superman, as he's leaping through the city, loses his footing as he bounds to the next rooftop. As a result, struggles, and the man that he's carrying, the racketeer, begins to fall to his death. Does so. Superman doesn't save him. Of course, Superman can't fly. Superman's just barely hanging onto the building. Can't really do anything about it. So he watches the man fall and coldly goes, dang, oh well, That's what he kind of deserves. Again, very vigilante, very golden age. Superman's not out here killing people, but doesn't have to save you. The falling man hits the streets coincidentally right in front of the rest of the Cat Protective League, who happen to be in the street below. Again, 13 pages. We're trying to make this lean and clean here. That spooks the Cat Protective League's members to go into the building. Superman ends up giving chase to the leagues and rounds up the rest of the Cat Protective League. At one point, he forces the Cat Protective League to destroy their own cabs with hammers. Superman's basically making them destroy their own livelihood. Golden Age Superman, in addition to being much more of a vigilante, a traditional sense vigilante, he's also all about that weird justice, that ironic punishment. And it should come no shock, though, that Jerry Siegel would go on to create the Spectre, a Golden Age superhero who was known to dish out ironic punishment. Anyway, after Superman is rounded up the gang, they're sent out to prison. This doesn't work. The head of the league, Reynolds is his name, manages to escape using some weird science tactic using, funny cigarette smoke, like some kind of knockout gas. It's really weird. No explanation, just lights up the cigarette and knocks out the cops in the car. Reynolds drives off to a cabin in the woods. Superman gives chase, only to find that Reynolds is actually the mere pawn of the villainous Ultra Humanite. Now, the Ultra Humanite is the very first time he's introduced. He's not hinted at all in any of the stories up to this point. He is just introduced cold into the story. Now, the Ultra Humanite goes on to explain to Superman that he calls himself the Ultra Humanite because of his superior intellect gained through a scientific experiment. And unfortunately for mankind, he chooses to use his intellect for crime. His goal, domination of the world. He's the mad scientist character. Obviously, Superman's associated with mad scientists. We're going to talk about the big one later with Lex Luthor. Ultra Humanite shows up first. What's actually funnier to me is Ultra Humanite goes on to imply that a lot of the corruption and criminal activities that Superman's facing in the city, it's not Metropolis yet, it's just the city, implied to be Cleveland, that Superman's facing during this first year of stories in Action Comics is actually being orchestrated by the Ultra Humanite. Ultra Humanite implies that he's doing all this stuff, and Superman's like, I can't stand for this. But before Superman can capture Ultra, as he calls himself, shorthand, the villain triggers an electronic floor, knocking out the Man of Steel, but not him. I guess the rubber wheels in the wheelchair. Anyway, it just knocks out Superman, allowing the villain to capture Superman and tie him up, and put Superman into a death trap. Superman is strapped to a log that is heading down a buzzsaw. And literally my first thought was, oh, how quaint. Now, obviously, this buzzsaw does not work, because Superman, even in the Golden Age, is very strong. Early on, it's established that he can handle an exploding artillery shell to the chest. That's how they sell him off as strong. So he takes the buzzsaw to the head, and it causes the buzzsaw to shatter. Shatters into hundreds of pieces, and one of the shrapnel pieces kills Reynolds, the head of the Cat Protective League. That means Superman has, at this point, has been indirectly involved with killing 2 individuals in one 13-page story. That is insane high kill count, but not the highest you've ever seen one of these things. As a result, though, Ultra and his henchmen get the heck out of there, and they flee on a plane that Superman does give pursuit to the plane, and again, Superman can't fly, so he's leaping into the air, and he leaps at the engines, causing the plane to crash. On the ground below, as Superman inspects the wreckage, he utters, "Strange. I can't find any traces of the Ultra Humanite." Well, that finishes his plan to control the Earth. Or does it? But what's interesting is that Ultra Humanite is implied to be a major threat. We see him in the second part of this, like, not really a second part, he just shows up at the end, the last few pages. But then they stop, and it seems like that Siegel and Schuster were like, hey, let's go ahead and introduce the supervillain, let's go ahead and do another story, and they waited to see what fan response was. There's no letters columns in these collections. That's one thing I wish they would include, because I would love to see how the fans responded to the Ultra Humanite. I imagine there was some well response, because, again, in fiction, supervillains, like we see there, they did exist. Pulp heroes had their pulp villains. Sherlock Holmes had Moriarty. So supervillains existed in some form of capacity. So I can see them wanting to give him a foil, but fan response maybe not been as solid, so they just didn't keep it up. Or maybe they realized that they had something better planned, because shortly after this, we would see other supervillains introduced. Enough the Prankster comes up pretty quickly in the early couple years of the stories. That's just weird. But we see Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor will come along shortly within the first 5 years or so. And when Lex Luthor shows up, it obviously makes characters like the Ultra Humanite pointless. And also, there's a kicker as well. Mad Scientists and Ultra Humanite in general, they're not that special. Like there's no unique ones. You would see different Superman comics with a various bad guy, various Mad Scientists of the week. It's a cool idea, though, to try to make a main villain. So that's kind of the thing I think works well here. It's the notion of, hey, we need a supervillain. A supervillain like somebody with a name that we can talk to and can be references to. That is not a bad idea. That's a great concept. What doesn't work well for the story is that, one, it's very brisk pace because it's a Golden Age story. So it's like bam, 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 bam. We got to get through these stories really quick. So there's a little bit of that there. It kind of makes it a little struggle. The whole Cat Detective League story, it reads like a regular Action Comic story at this point. Superman literally a couple of issues before that was taking out poorly made cars and drunk drivers. But this one is different. This one, they try to do a supervillain. I don't know if it's as successful, but you got to appreciate the effort. I definitely would like to cover the other Ultra Humanite stories, and originally at one point I debated including Action Comics 14 in this, but truthfully, Action Comics 14 is structured pretty much like Action Comics 13. It's a totally unrelated plot, dealing with corruption, and all of a sudden it's revealed that Ultra Humanite's behind it. But still, I think it works well. As for standout moments in the story, I really liked the bit where Superman is just put on the death trap. I think it's just a cute little moment. It's obviously meant to be serious, but readers know that Superman's like nigh invulnerable. He took a knife to the chest, no problem. It bounced off. Got shot at a few times. Didn't bother him. A buzzsaw ain't gonna kill him. Now, here on The Never-Ending Battle, we do have a ranking system. So I do like to rank my Superman comics as I cover them, as I like to cover them in non-linear fashion. And that ranking system is the big list. I have not given it a name yet in 4 episodes. Alright, so this list is right now currently sitting at 9 issues. These are the 9 best Superman stories, or worse, depending how you look at it, of all time. But the number 1 best Superman story of all time, according to me, and that's what matters, is Superman Birthright. The second best Superman story of all time is Superman Nation Divided, a lovely Elseworld story about Superman during the Civil War. I highly recommend that one, obviously. Number 3 is Superman Man of Steel by John Byrne. I'm coming better with that one as I'm reading more Byrne eras I'm doing on the outside of the show for research. Still third best on the list. It's not the best origin, but I like it a lot. Fourth is kind of a weird one. Technically, it's Justice League of America number 103, but it's also considered the Rutland, Vermont Halloween crossover. So I decided to put Amazing Adventures 16 and Thor number 207 in there. That's the Marvel issues, because there was a weird Marvel DC crossover that sort of happened. Fifth is Speeding Bullets, a vigilante Superman story where Superman's actually Batman. I really did not care for the ending, but parts of it's really good. It's really important, but I just didn't care for it at the end of the day. The 6th best story on the list is Superman in the House of Mystery. That was DC Comics Presents number 53. That is a weird little story where Superman's in the House of Mystery and has to deal with Mr. Mixaplex. And that's a fun little story. I liked it, but it wasn't the best. It's kind of there. Now we're trying to get into actual bad comic territory. We have Sweet Dreams, which was Superman Batman number 65. That one was just a really weird anthology of nightmare stories. I just did not like it. It was very dull, very boring, very old. The 8th Superman story on the list out of 9 is Secret Origin by Jeff Johns and Gary Frank. I just did not care for that. I thought it was very derivative and very dull, very boring, very bleh. 9th Superman story on the list, and the worst Superman story of all time, is Superman Kal, an Elseworld story where Superman is in the Middle Ages, and then some terrible stuff happens to Lois, and it's just awful and reprehensible, and that really ruined my mood for the comic. Where does Action Comics number 13 rank on the list? So Action Comics number 13 historically is a big deal. It's the very first time Superman faces a supervillain, and one of the very first supervillains in superhero comics, period. It's not the first Luthor story, and it's not historically significant in that regard. Ultra Humanite ultimately has a handful of appearances in early Superman stories, just because he ends up getting outclassed by other mad scientists, and especially Lex Luthor. I do like this better than Speeding Bullets. I will read it before I read Speeding Bullets again. It's a lighter story. It's 13 pages. It reads quickly, but also it's entertaining, and I really like reading Golden Age Superman stories. They are delightfully quaint and kind of interesting and thought-provoking at times, and it is not better than Justice League number 103. Justice League 103 has some interesting fights in it. The rest of the crossover stuff with Marvel was a mixed bag. The Amazing Adventures, which was the Beast story, kind of meh. The Thor comic's good. But the Justice League of America number 103 has a nice Phantom Stranger story going on in there as well. And I like Felix Faust. I think he's an interesting villain. So yeah, I think it's about as good as the 5th best Superman story on the list. So that's where it will go. Okay, that brings us to round 2. The Brainiac Trilogy from Action Comics number 647 through 649. Written by Roger Stern with art by George Perez, Carrie Gamil, and Brett Breeding. Letters by Bill Oakley, colorist Glenn Whittemore, and edited by John Peterson and Mike Carlin. As for the art here, I'm assuming, based on how those things are going out, George Perez probably provided rough breakdowns. Gary Camille probably finished the pencils, and Breeding's definitely the inker of sorts. So, the Brainiac trilogy sets to further develop the post-Crisis Brainiac into something more resembling the Kulin Brainiac of the Silver Age. The original post-Crisis version of Brainiac was actually a circus mentalist named Milton Fine that went by the stage name of Brainiac. He would end up becoming possessed by Vril Dox, this Kulin scientist who messes around with space transport technology, teleportation technology, and through political shenanigans failed his teleportation, his essence gets scattered across the universe. A bunch of stuff happens after Vildrox, possesses Brainiac, involving mind control, Lex Luthor, and of all things, Gangbuster. Man, Gangbuster just shows up all over the place in these 80s comics. Either way, all this results in Brainiac being put into a catatonic state, but for everybody, including Superman, they think Brainiac is dead. So at this point, Brainiac is presumed dead, but LexCorp knows he's actually alive, and that's where the story opens. Brainiac Trilogy opens with Clark Kent being tormented by Vril Drox's spirit, as Milton Fine lays in that catatonic state in a LexCorp facility in the Rockies. LexCorp scientist Sidney Happerson, who you may recall from this summer's Superman, he's actually almost picture for picture. Sidney Happerson is a major deal in the early post-crisis Superman. He's actually one of the main scientists. You see him all the time. Hey, it's pretty cool to see him here. So Sidney Happerson, though, has been tinkering with Brainiac to quote-unquote help him. The exact motivation for this is not clear. I'm assuming Luthor is attempting to use Brainiac for his means. So he's put Sidney Happerson on it because Sidney's his resident tech and biology person. He usually deals with the robot stuff. He's there trying to work on Brainiac as well as working with the Dr. Kelly, who's trying to keep Brainiac alive. So that's the problem. Brainiac is in a catatonic state, but he's actually slowly dying. To help save Brainiac, Happerson has brought in another failed project of his and Superman villain, Metallo. Metallo was recently, at this point in the story, he shows up early in the burn run, but he also shows up a little bit later, and he gets captured by LexCorp, and he gets tinkered with. Happerson's been messing with him. But ultimately, the thought process is that Metallo circuitry, what Happerson thinks is that Metallo circuitry can be useful in saving Brainiac's body and his mind. It goes about as well as you can imagine, because Brainiac is somebody you don't trust, neither is Metallo. Brainiac turns on Happerson, takes over his mind because Brainiac is a mentalist. He has mind control powers for real. That's the thing Milton Fine has. Milton Fine is a quote-unquote mutant and is able to take over Happerson's mind long enough for Happerson to basically cause some problems for LexCorp. Basically starts cutting off transmission signals and is able to hijack various buildings. That's going to be a problem later. Now, Happerson is fully enthralled by Brainiac when Brainiac creates a control chip. This control chip taps into the base of the person's neck and basically allows Brainiac to fully control the mind of the person. It forces Happerson to basically be a slave, and Brainiac launches into motion for his new plan, which is to make a new body and escape the Earth. Now, while this is going on, Superman is now searching for Luthor because Superman believes that he is somewhat connected to Brainiac in this whole situation. He knows Brainiac's still alive, and he knows Luthor's up to something. So the search takes him all the way to Houston because that's where Luthor is touring an automated weapons factory with his investors. And that goes poorly because, well, Brainiac's got control over LexCorp buildings, and he starts causing the automated weapons factory to go haywire in an attempt to kill Luthor. Now, Superman shows up unexpected. He saves the tycoon and ends up confronting Luthor over Brainiac's survival. Like, where's Brainiac? Where's he at? Luthor's like, I don't know what you're talking about, and you can't pin anything on me because Luthor's Teflon Don in this era. But this does cause Luthor to get anxious about Brainiac's status, but he is reassured by Happerson when he contacts him that everything is fine. Again, spoilers, it is not fine because now the entire team of Happerson's team is now enthralled to Brainiac. He's under the control chips. It just keeps getting worse. This sends the second phase of Brainiac's plan into motion. Brainiac sends Metallo and an army of Metallo robots to attack LexCorp. Now, Man of Steel is there. Superman's there to save it, stop them, and save LexCorp. And he does it pretty quickly because he realizes very fast that these Metallos that he's fighting aren't really Metallo. They don't have the brain in them. Metallo's known to have a brain. Nor are they powered by kryptonite, because at this point in continuity, there's still only one rock of kryptonite on the planet, and it's not in Metallo's body anymore. Now, because it's pretty easy to take out Metallo, it goes pretty quick. Superman sweeps through him, but he realizes, where the heck is the real Metallo? And the event also causes Luthor to get a little bit more anxious, because something's up here. Because he's like, why is Metallo here? Metallo was in our facility elsewhere. And he finds out Happerson requested the Metallo to go to the Rockies. And he's like, something's up. Luthor flees off to go to the Rockies facility. Meanwhile, the whole thing turns out to be a ruse. The whole reason why LexCorp was attacked by Metallos was actually a disguise, because the intent behind the attack was to actually serve as a distraction. As the real Metallo in human skin, and a much better looking human skin than what was in the Burn issues, is infiltrating Cadmus to kidnap the lead scientist, Dr. Augustine. Dr. Augustine is one of the founders of the Cadmus Project, and if you don't know what Cadmus is, oh boy, we will have some stuff with that later, the future episode. I've been reading up some of the Kirby era stuff, and my lord, it's beautiful. But Cadmus is a secret government project basically dealing with a lot of DNA, a lot of cloning, a lot of weird weapons, a lot of DNA aliens. The Guardian is associated with them. It's pretty cool stuff. That's what you need to know. Dr. Augustine is one of the founders, so he's a major biotech scientist. And that's where the plan starts coming into focus. To make a new body, Brainiac intends to actually recreate the original Viral Doc's body, the original colon body, using Dr. Augustine. And not only that, he's going to provide it with enhancements to get the powers of Milton Fine into there. So actually take Milton Fine's body, kind of upgrading it to the Coulon body. And he needs a renowned bioengineer to do this. He's basically going to turn Milton Fine's body into Brainiac with some enhancements. And Cadmus Project is the best place to get the clones, after all. They do a really good job at that. Clone Jimmy Olsen a billion times. That was weird. Now, after a short fight between Metallo, Superman, and Guardian, and my boy, the DNA alien Duplex, love seeing that guy there, Superman's left wondering what the heck is actually going on, and how does all this involve Luthor? How does Luthor, Metallo, Cadmus, and Brainiac all work together? So Luthor, Superman's puzzled, and he goes, I need to look into those. So he actually goes back as Clark Kent as an investigative reporter, and uses his tools available to him as an investigative reporter, quickly to deduce the location of a research facility from the public filings of LexCorp's failed takeover bid of Star Labs. That whole thing happens during the Superman Exile story. Now, Superman's going on there and trying to figure out what the heck's happening. And he goes, hey, it's the research facility. Now, at that research facility, Brainiac has been taunting Luthor with a grand plan. And Luthor vows to stop him. He's like, I'm not going to let you take over my company and do all this stuff. And Brainiac isn't a Republican serial villain. He has already set the plans in motion. He did it 35 minutes ago, Lex. He actually been done it like 3 days ago. You've been in a mental prison for a while. Superman is also arrives a little bit too late, as Milton Fine is no more. When he arrives, Milton Fine is gone, and only Viral Dox remains. He has returned in a corporal form, and he's now an enhanced body. The Coulon quickly overwhelms Superman with his superior mental powers, with probably the best 2-page spread. It's like, actually not even 2 pages, it's like several pages of Superman just getting his mind warped. And, ooh, beautiful stuff. Anyway, Superman's mind gets overwhelmed, and allows Brainiac to craft his skull ship, his trademark look. I call it back to the Bronze Age Brainiac design ships, and escape. Brainiac is escaping to space. Superman tries to give chase, but he is quickly diverted as Brainiac reveals to him that while Metallo was in the city, he also planted various nuclear bombs around Metropolis. That Superman has to stop, has to find all 4 of them and save the city, or risk Metropolis, or let him, or you can capture him, but Metropolis is ruined. Superman chooses the correct choice, because save Metropolis, jargon of Luthor, and lets Brainiac escape to space. Well, and of course, Brainiac will show back up in about a few months from this, and the very first big Triangle era event called Panic in the Skies. That's going to be a lot of fun when we get to that one. But that's not what we're talking about today. Brainiac escapes. Superman's kind of left going, I'll get you. And the things are set in motion for some really crazy stuff to take place over the next few months of Superman comics. Okay, so let's talk about what worked here. I think the Brainiac trilogy is pretty successful what it's doing. I admittedly did not read a lot of the post-crisis Brainiac stories yet. I've been reading the Burn Run outside of the podcast readings the last several days, just kind of been interested in it. Not just the Burn stuff, I'm also reading the Marv Wolfman stuff on Adventures of Superman. I'm getting a little bit more appreciative of it. I don't think it's great, but I can see why it works, and it reads well. As such, though, I have not gone to the Milton Vine story. It's a few issues from where we're at. So it's a few issues away from where I'm at. But I think the Trilogy did a really good job of quickly establishing for the reader who the heck Milton Vine is and what is Brainiac. Because the other Brainiac stories weren't titled Brainiac on the cover, from what I recall. I looked at them. There's a few post-crisis Brainiac stories with Milton Vine, about 6 or so, if that. And none of them really has Brainiac on the cover. Brainiac's not touted. Brainiac's not said. This is the first one that's explicitly called Brainiac Trilogy, and we see Brainiac on the cover. And he's green skinned, and he looks cool. And as such, they know people are going to pick this up. And literally, we get the whole Brainiac story kind of recap for us pretty well, I would argue, in the first couple pages. And that's really neat. Roger Stern did a really good job there. Then... and the second issue is a more Metallo focus, because Metallo's reveal is kept to the very last page of the first issue of the story. And the second part, Metallo's the main focus. We get a whole backstory of Metallo. So yeah, we get all the Metallo stuff that takes place in the post-crisis. We get a recap of Superman #2. We get a recap of the Action Comics Doom Patrol crossover. We get enough little background, and it only takes a couple pages, but it quickly gets us up to speed with this version of Metallo. And the only thing that's kind of not really explained very well is the Cadmus stuff. But I'm also just happen to be reading Cadmus. I've been reading Jimmy Olsen, Superman's pal, by Jack Kirby for the last few weeks, and you know what? I picked this up really quickly, and I know post-crisis Cadmus is a little different, and there's an annual that explains all of it. And also there's some stories that recap pretty much those Jimmy Olsen stories in a modern era. But I haven't read those yet, but you know what? I don't care. I picked up pretty quick, and you don't really need to know. I mean, oh yeah, it's Cadmus. Like, if you know who Cadmus is, yeah, it's a big deal. If you don't know what Cadmus is, it still does a good enough job, I think, explaining it. It doesn't explain Duplex's whole thing. That's fine. I love Duplex, so it's fine. Like, you see that dude, that weird little DNA alien, you're like, oh, what's that dude's deal? And you look into it. And that's how it was every time. So, yeah, I think it does a really good job of telling the story, but also kind of catching readers up to the story. This is... also, interestingly enough, their attempt, what we end up seeing a lot with, what I think works well, is this is them trying to walk back some of the Burn stuff. And not in a way that makes the Burn stuff look worse. Like, sometimes you see retcons happen, like Birthright. Superman Birthright retcons all the Burn origin. And I think it does so in a well, intelligent way. It makes the Burn stuff look weaker by comparison, but it doesn't make the Burn stuff seem dumb by comparison. Meanwhile, Secret Origin does also retcons both of those, but tries to make them feel dumb because it's like, hey, we're going to do the Silver Age version of the story. And that's something that we kind of see a lot with like the Jeff Johns era stuff. Anytime Jeff Johns touches a book, and I get why, but Jeff Johns will often kind of, when he has to go back to this Silver Age elements, and redo like a way of all the modern stuff, he ends up trying to make the other stuff seem dumb or pointless. There's a Toyman story that's really interesting. I was looking at it for this episode and decided to save it for another time. That Toyman story kind of it's a really good one-shot, but it quickly throws all the stuff that happens in the 90s under the bus. And that's not what we see here. So when Byrne leaves the Superman books, Superman in Action Comics and Adventures of Superman, because he's kind of writing all three at this point, towards the end of there, when he leaves, what ends up happening is we start seeing DC's writers, I don't know if it's editorial or if it's just Roger Stern or George Perez or any of the writers, or what will eventually be Louise Simonson and Jerry Ordway. I don't know if they are walking back the elements and purpose, like, hey, we want to get rid of some of these Byrne stuff, because Byrne has a very Marvelizing effect, literally makes these characters like Marvel. Milton Fine is an X-Men villain. It's straight up an X-Men origin story, even though he did not write that. That was a Marv Wolfman joint, that first Brainiac appearance. That version of Brainiac is an X-Men villain. The Superman origin story is a Marvel origin story. His characterization of Superman is more in line with what you see at Marvel. And here we start seeing the elements kind of get waded away. We see that a lot in this post-crisis era, not post-crisis, but this post-Byrne era, that we're starting seeing all these Silver Age elements that were kind of like cast off from Byrne when he rebooted everything, starting to make a slow walk back. Milton Fine is one of those. We slowly, and that's why I think kind of works here, they don't really downplay the stuff. It's like it happened. Feels logical. Some of the post-Byrne, some of the previous Brainiac appearances with Milton Fine happen after Byrne leaves. So we start seeing them transition from Milton Fine to the traditional Brainiac, the Brainiac that people know from the Super Friends show, the Brainiac that just wants a decent pair of pants, that Brainiac, the Brainiac that everybody knows, not just some Svengoolie looking dude who has mental powers. Cool, but it's not Brainiac for most people. So they're trying to walk it back a little bit, but in a way that feels like they're just picking up the ball and running with it, not just starting a whole new game. And I think that does a really good job here. What didn't work with the story, though, some of the motivation stuff is kind of iffy. Like, we don't really understand why Happerson's messing with Brainiac, maybe because I'm reading this out of context. At this point in Superman comics, it is very soap opera to the max, and it jumps around between the titles. We're not in Triangle Era just yet. Triangle Era would launch a few weeks after this, but man, we are very close to the Triangle Era. And while this comic did not go through Action Comics, Adventures of Superman, or Superman, it just stayed Action. Those kind of elements start being there, though. The elements that happen in Adventures of Superman and in Superman proper, those are carrying over to Action Comics, and we see that play out. Excuse me. So there's a possibility I'm reading it in a vacuum, and I don't catch the Happerson stuff. But it's kind of the thing I like about this era of Superman. Superman in this era is that maximum soap opera. It's this, every issue has meaning. Like, you catch something, you read something, it seems innocuous at one point, then you read two issues down the road, and holy crap, this matters. And it's really cool. I like that kind of era's comic book making. So I think it's kind of neat this takes place here, and I really thought it was fun. All right, so the standout moment for me in the story, though, I really like, and this is more of a dark moment, but the moment where Luthor is kind of reveals, it's revealed that Luthor's not actually seeing the plan happen in action. He's actually seeing a projection from Brainiac as he sits there and watches Brainiac execute the plan. Brainiac is not a Republic serial villain. He's not some RKO villain. He has done it already. And not only that was interesting, but shortly after that, we see the door opens up. Luthor's in his plain clothes, trapped in this prison, essentially, his holding room. And at that point, the other scientists show up. It's in silhouette. We don't see who they are, and they're holding one of the control discs. And shortly after that, next time we see Luthor, we see in the base of his skull is that control disc. So it's a really dark scene. I think it was really cool, really evocative. It set the tone pretty fast, and it worked really well. I think it's just a cool scene. It's a small scene, but I really liked it. Now, ranking the Brainiac trilogy. That's a trickier one. In the sense of, it's not a perfect comic by any means. It's really enjoyable. It's got elements of stuff I like. We see Cadmus. I'm a big sucker for the Cadmus stuff. We see Brainiac, and I'm a big Brainiac fan, and this Brainiac is pretty interesting to me. I think he's a compelling, interesting villain. He's got a motivation. It's pretty clear that he wants his body back, and he aims to do it. And that means taking out this dude and basically using him. That means he's using him. And it starts connecting some of the more Silver Age elements that I like, but also doesn't get rid of the stuff that we're already doing. It doesn't get rid of the Milton Fine stuff. Milton Fine's still there. He's just different. Ranking it, though, looking at the list, I think this is definitely better than the Rutland, Vermont crossover. It's got a lot more going on to it. The stakes are important. Like, what ends up happening after this event, this storyline is huge. This is where we get Panic in the Skies. Panic in the Skies follows this story in a few months. And Panic in the Skies is like one of those big definitive Superman stories. It sets up pretty much how the Triangle Era works, but also Superman, how he works in the DC universe. Brainiac stories follow after this, and they're dependent on this version of Brainiac. I don't think it's better than Man of Steel 1 through 6. As much as I don't care for Man of Steel, I cannot deny its importance. That makes it the new number 4 on the list. Round 3. So this arc doesn't have the full name. It doesn't really have one, but I'm just going to call it Clark Kent Fired. This is found in Superman numbers 410, 412, and 413. Number 411 is a Celebration to Julie Schwartz issue, and I would have to be paid to cover that one. I do not not care for that man. But moving on. So Superman 410, 412, and 413. The writer for these stories is Cary Bates, and penciler is Kurt Swan, the definitive Superman artist of this era. Inker is Al Williamson. Colorist is Gene D'Angelo, with letters by Gaspar on issues 410 and John Costanza for issues 412 and 413. Edited by Julius Schwartz, with a cover by Klaus Janson. I have not talked about the covers yet, but Klaus Janson does really good covers here. All three of them are really evocative covers, and you don't see Klaus Janson be referred to as a penciler and cover artist. Usually he's referred to as an inker and a collaborator of artists, and he does a really good job here. I think these covers are really evocative, and it's actually what made me read these. So, set in the final days of the pre-Crisis Bronze Age, Lex Luthor carries out his most audacious plan yet, to make Superman think he has lost his mind, and along with it, everything else. The story opens with Superman stopping a falling satellite as it crashes towards Earth, and afterwards, Clark Kent, he reports the news to the event to the Daily Planet as a scoop. After Superman runs the news story and gets it into the Daily Planet, it's quickly revealed that the satellite incident actually didn't occur. The satellite did not fall. Heck, the satellite is still in orbit. The whole event leads the Daily Planet having to run a retraction, and not just that, pulping a bunch of issues of the newspaper. As he forces a retraction, they have to run a retraction. It forces Superman, who is at this point, struggling between admitting that he is losing his mind or having to make the difficult decision to claim that Clark Kent, aka himself, made up the whole story. Decided it's important that he has to throw his secret identity under the bus, then let people lose faith in Superman himself, because we can't have a superpower individual who is losing his marbles. Anyway, Superman doesn't want everybody to think he's going crazy, so he throws Clark Kent under the bus. So this causes, obviously, both the Daily Planet and to fire Clark Kent. Not only is he losing his job at the Planet, he loses his job on Galaxy Broadcast's 6 o'clock news. He does the news anchor position. So that sucks for Clark. Clark has to leave. It's a really touching moment. Like, the whole how it plays out is he cleans up his desk. We see Lois ticked off at Perry White. We see Jimmy Olsen just upset. And Lana Lang, who's working at the Planet, not the Planet, but looking at GBS, the Galaxy Broadcast Service, as his co-anchor and love interest at the time, because they're actually a romantic couple, is also distraught watching Clark have to leave. And they all don't know he's Superman. Man, why would Superman do this to him? Maybe it's a big ruse. Maybe it's all this stuff. And Superman's like, nah, I'm just glad I got to get out of here. And it's just, I don't know, it's kind of interesting note. Cary Bates does a really good job at writing these Superman stories in this time frame, and I'd love to see more of it collected out there. But it's not the point. As Clark loses his job, Luthor laughs it up, because Superman's refusal to admit that he's losing his memories has cost Clark Kent his job. Now, Luthor is oblivious to the whole Clark being Superman thing, because it's not really what Luthor cares about. He just wants to get revenge of Superman. Clark Kent happened to be an unfortunate casualty. He was expecting it to possibly be Lois, for goodness sake. But he's like, oh man, dang, it sucks that Clark Kent lost his job. And Luthor's sidekicks and love interests like, man, always liked him on the news. He as good as Dan Rather. Oh well, Superman sucks. And it's there where Luthor reveals to his henchmen, and obviously the reader, that he's been manipulating Superman using this brain chain technology to implant false memories into the head. That is obviously going to make Superman not trust things, and it's time for him to make his final move on Superman. Now, back in Metropolis, Superman's questioning reality in weird, funny ways. There's a bit where Superman saves construction workers, and he goes to ask them, did he actually save them? He's asking for confirmation and an affidavit, like, hey, can you swear that I did this? And they're like, yeah. It's a really funny gag. And again, Cary Bates does a really funny Superman at times. There's moments where Superman's just like deadpans the camera and just looks at the audience like, can you get a load of this? Like, his superpower is not just that he's Superman, he can see through the fourth wall. And it's really cool. It's really funny. And it's not in like a Deadpool kind of way either. It's just like womp womp, kind of just like to the audience. It's fun. Clark is now on the street looking for work. He runs into Steve Lombard, that blowhard. They both chatted up at Steve's sporting goods store, and Steve offers Clark a job to help balance the books at the store, because Steve can't balance the financials all together. I don't know how he's running a successful store. The comic itself knows Steve is a blowhard. I want to make that clear. It isn't that's me not really caring for Steve Lombard. And no, we're not. Steve Lombard is a jerk I love to hate. The comic's aware that Steve sucks though, because there's like Steve's at the store and he's signing this kid's football that bought it, and the kid's like, who's Steve Lombard? Nobody cares about Steve Lombard. Steve Lombard was a successful professional quarterback, the full equivalent of the NFL, and he still was forgotten by kids. That's so good. It is during the reunion, though, that Luthor attacks the city with these massive, spears, and that causes Superman to go chase Luthor. Luthor and Superman have a fight out in the skies, as Luthor's wearing his battle armor at this point, like he always is, and Superman just loses it. He's enraged by these events that he would dare attempt to kill citizens like Steve Lombard with one of these spears. Superman's so enraged, he decides to end this whole feud altogether and runs his fist through Luthor's heart. This, of course, is not real, despite what the comic cover says, and how the story goes, it's not real. Clark begins to panic more, though, because, oh my god, I was willing to kill Luthor, that's messed up. But 2, I didn't do that, and something's wrong with me. He decides to lay low, as, Clark can help. He does help Steve balance the books where he's like, man, this sucks so much, but I'm losing my mind. I gotta do something. It is here where we start seeing this subplot develop, and that's why I call the story Clark Kent's Fired, because this story is more about Clark Kent. It's kind of like the last Clark Kent story, too. It's the real developed Clark Kent. We end up getting the last Superman story when whatever happens to Man of Steel, the Man of Tomorrow, This is whatever happened to Clark Kent. And it's kind of interesting. So his friends are starting to rally together for Clark, because, man, they're like, Clark deserves better. Like, something's up with this story. Because they're like, why would Clark throw away everything for this story? Like, it's not making him money. There's obviously something here. But they're like, hey, we got to cheer up Clark. They think Clark's having a bad time. So they're trying to round up people, do like this, they call it a roast of Clark Kent. And it doesn't read like a roast. It reads like a celebration. But they're like, hey, we're going to celebrate Clark Kent. And we're going to talk up Clark Kent as a person. So they start pulling together, and they get Steve Lombard in on it, and they try to trick Clark to go to the event. But before Clark can ever even attend the event, Luthor takes on his ultimate move. Like the other one was his final move, these spears, but he activates it. And that's when the spears activate, and the city around him begins to fade to white. Literally, like the paper disappears. The ink and color disappear off the paper. It's a really cool effect. Kurt Swan really was cooking on this one. So the city Metropolis begins to fade to white. Clark's starting to lose his mind, and he goes to the planet. He's like, guys, we got to get you out of here. And which is really weird because at the same time, they're pulling together this roast of Clark Kent. And even though the comic takes a moment to go, you're confused? Don't worry. We'll explain. There's something obviously here. Really weird structure, but it works. It's got the charm of this Bronze Age stuff. But Superman's like rushing around the city trying to stop it from vanishing. And all he could hear is Luthor's voice gloating to him over his immense success, because Superman, as much as he hates Superman, he also loves to gloat about beating Superman. He's celebrating the victory over the Man of Steel because of his superior intellect. And Superman thinks the Earth has vanished. He thinks there's nothing left. And it quickly reveals to the audience that none of this is real. Luthor has managed to somehow knock out and kidnap Superman and is tormenting Superman on Luthor's island in the Caribbean. And he would be stuck there if it wasn't for the fact that the roast takes place. The roast of Clark Kent is taking place simultaneously, even with Clark Kent not there. And as all these people from Clark's childhood and Thomas and Metropolis come forward and talk about Clark Kent as a good person, that's why I think this kind of reads as well as like the last Clark Kent story. Superman's super hearing is subconsciously picking up these kind of words, and it's allowing him to see through the haze that is this imaginary story. And he comes to, and he breaks out of the trap that Lex has played for him, and he then takes Lex to task. Him and Lex battle because Superman takes that information really well. He gets really frustrated, so him and Luthor are battling over the skies of the Caribbean Sea. This time it's for real, not a fake fight. But before anything can come about, the battle is cut short by a raging, storming vortex in the sky that takes Luthor and carries him off to places unknown, which are revealed later to be Brainiac during the Crisis on Infinite Earths. And takes all this pretty well in stride, all things considered. He shakes off all this trauma of watching his friends disappear and being under mind control and losing his grip on reality, whatever. He ends up rushing off to join Clark Kent's celebration at the roast for him, and reveals that the false story was him and Clark's plan to catch Luthor, and Clark gets his job miraculously back in the end, and hey, that's it. Yay! Story is over. It's a weird story. Clark Kent Fired. I liked it when I read it, and I liked it again on the reread. I read this twice this past year. It reads well. What works well for it is Cary Bates is a good writer. He's actually got pretty good plot structure over things, considered there's some minor qualms. But I think the story works really well for this era of Superman. It's got jokes. It's fun. It's action-packed. The downside is it's rushed in places. I think the ending is really rushed. I could really use the 4th issue to kind of explain it. And some of the weird elements about the flashbacks, like the mental images, kind of don't add up if you think about it too much. Excuse me. But I think it's a really good Luthor story. It's a really good example of Luthor's kind of like that late Silver Age, Bronze Age era Luthor that is just like meticulous and conniving, who's always like trying to prove himself superior to Superman. It reads very Gene Hackman Lex Luthor. I think it just reads really well. When it works for it works well. I think Luthor's really well done here. Luthor gets his sidekicks that we often see. At this point, we have the twins, which again, hey, we see them in the movie, Plato and Pluto, and we get pretty good stuff with Lana. I think the Lana stuff and the walkout, Clark leaving the Daily Planet under, like, I think he's fired, is really good. I think what works well works well. What doesn't work well does unfortunately weigh it down. I think the constant fake outs kind of undermine it a little bit, but that's kind of par for course for this era of Superman, so that's whatever. I think the art doesn't hold up as well. Part of that is the digital quality I've been reading just doesn't look great. The colors by Gene D'Angelo aren't bad. They just look very washed out, and that seems to be, I want to say that's more of a consequence of the way DC preserve these stories for their app. I'm glad they're here. I just wish they would do a little bit more of a restoration of them, even if it was just like, hey, we're just putting straight scans of the newsprint comics. Sometimes they do that, and at times it doesn't look good, but at least you can see the texture of the page better, so at least the colors look a little bit more true to form, what they intend to be. Here, they don't really hold up well, so I don't know how to rank that. It does look very washed, and it's not just these 3 issues. A lot of these stories of this era of Superman just look like this, and it's kind of like this weird liminal space of Superman, because they are pretty aware that John Byrne's going to be coming in on the books within the near future. Crisis is about to go down. It's starting to go down, I believe, at the time this final issue comes out of this part. And there's a few more issues in between before they get to the final Crisis, the official Infinite Crisis. These are kind of this like last hurrah of this era. I do think it works well as a last Clark Kent story, because we get as I mentioned earlier in this episode, we get the last Superman story. This is the last Clark Kent story, because the Clark Kent we see in this comic is not the Clark Kent we get later. They do a lot to make Clark Kent try to be consistent, but we don't see this exact same Clark Kent again, ever. It's just a different version of the character. We see the supporting cast, like we see a lot of that supporting cast today in the comics. This is pre-Cat Grant, so we don't see her, but we see Steve Lombard, we see Lana, we see Lois, we see Jimmy, we see Perry. Heck, we even see Maxwell Edge, the head of Galactic Broadcasting, which is interesting if you read the post-crisis stuff. But here we get like a pretty good little story, a little send-off. So, standout moment. So, actually, I liked a lot of this story. Like I said, I enjoyed it. I read it. There's so much when I thought for this episode, I'm like, oh, Luthor story I want to do. Again, I wanted to do this one because I read it this past summer, and I'm like, it's kind of underrated. It's not great, like upper echelon, but it's really enjoyable. But there's a lot of standout moments for me, but probably the big part is, again, that send-off of Clark getting fired from the planet. I think that's actually a really good bit, because it shows him like talking to the characters. We see him talking to Lois, we see him talking to Jimmy, we see him talking to Lana, and we kind of get his place where he's at. Honestly, I wish he did not get his job back at the ending. That's probably what undermines this whole thing, is that ending page just feels so rushed. If he didn't get his job back, I think that would be really good, because there's like, okay, there's this weird status quo, but he gets his job back. The status quo kind of resumes, which I get it. That's kind of this comics, the illusion of change. But I think that would have helped. The walkout bit, I think that's probably the best moment of the story. And along with that, if anything, it's definitely I think the full effects of the fade out is also a really good moment. Watching the reality fade away, I think that was really well done and well executed. Now, ranking this thing, it's definitely not the strongest story of the night. It's definitely not going to be as high as the Cat Protection League. I think that's just a much better story, a more important story. This is just an interesting note. This is not like the first Luthor story, or even the first post-crisis Luthor story. I hope you've already read that. It's not even like a key Luthor story. It just kind of explains where Luthor was at the beginning of, well, how was Luthor already with Brainiac during the Infinite Crisis? Oh my god, during the Crisis on Infinite Earths. That's important, but not the most. Definitely towards the bottom of the list. Speeding Bullets, as much as I don't like it at times, it's historically more important than this story. I do think this is better, though, than Superman and House of Mystery. Superman House of Mystery is good, but not great. As much as I enjoy, again, I love it. I just don't think it's perfect. And I think it has a lot of common with this. It's like Kurt Swan joint. I think Kurt Swan does some cool stuff with it, both art wise. I think there's there's a good transition moment in this issue of this arc where Superman turns Clark Kent to Superman behind like a bus. I think that was really cool, well executed. But it's definitely not the best looking Superman story. It's not one that's interesting. So yeah, not as good as Speeding Bullets, historically speaking. It's definitely better than Superman House of Mystery. So yeah, that's where it's going to be. It's going to be the new number 8 on the list, which is not a bad showing. And that's a wrap for this week's episode. Now, The Never Ending Battle releases most Fridays on your podcasting platform of choice. You can find us now on YouTube as well as iTunes and Spotify, amongst other things. You can find companion articles for this episode along with comic art and other relevant material in the show notes on extremelyuncanny.com. You can follow the show at NEBSuperman at bsky.social. You can find my comic reviews for the Comic Beat each Wednesday, where we're working on the Marvel reviews still, along with Wednesday comic reviews. If you like the show, be sure to rate and review it and tell a friend. It does help the show as it spreads. Next week, we're going to do the much delayed and much long promised World's Finest episode, as I did some revisions to the format. So this episode was kind of a change in pacing. I feel like after the first 3 episodes, I didn't originally want to do a lot of recapping stuff, but I'm like, as I'm doing this, I feel like I need to do some recap. So this episode was kind of largely an experiment of recapping it. There was supposed to be some other episodes released. I did record the World's Finest episode, but I'm going to pulp it as I try to do some changes. And just some other stuff, like I did write the Christmas episode, but just life could not let me get that in no matter what I did, and I just didn't want to release a late Christmas episode. So I decided, hey, let's go ahead and move on to New Year's Evil. We'll save the Christmas episode for next year. It's fine. I think the story worked really well. So I'm trying out some new stuff, so the episode pacing kind of gets weird. I'm hoping to get into the routine here, just kind of give you some background information, try to get the routine of the episode worked out. And I'm liking this new format a little bit. We'll see how it goes. It does make for a little bit longer episode, so I may have changed some things around, but I think it's fun. So yeah. That's it for The Never Ending Battle, though. I'm your host, Jordan, signing off. And as always, never surrender in the battle for a better tomorrow. Take care.